cheek. For a moment she stood thus in silence, and then her head went high, and she turned her back upon me as she had upon Hooja. Some of the prisoners laughed, and I saw the face of Gat, the hairy one, go very black as he looked at me searchingly, and what I could see of Diane's cheek went suddenly from red to white. Immediately after we resumed the march, and though I realized that in some way I had offended Diane the Beautiful, I could not prevail upon her to talk with me, that I might learn wherein I had erred. In fact, I might quite as well have been addressing a sphinx, for all the attention I got. At last my own foolish pride stepped in and prevented my making any further attempts, and thus a companionship that, without my realizing it, had come to mean a great deal to me was cut off. Thereafter I confined my conversation to Perry. Hooja did not renew his advances toward the girl, nor did he again venture near me. Again the weary and apparently interminable marching became a perfect nightmare of horrors to me. The more firmly fixed became the realization that the girl's friendship had meant so much to me, the more I came to miss it, and the more impregnable the barrier of silly pride. But I was very young, and I would not ask Gat for the explanation which I was sure he could give, and that might have made everything all right again. On the march or during halts, Diane refused constantly to notice me. When her eyes wandered in my direction, she looked either over my head or directly through me. At last I became desperate, and determined to swallow my self-esteem, and again begged her to tell me how I had offended, and how I might make reparation. I made up my mind that I should do this at the next halt. We were approaching another range of mountains at the time, and when we reached them, instead of winding across them through some high-flung pass, we entered a mighty natural tunnel, a series of labyrinth grottos, dark as Erebus. The guards had no torches or light of any description. In fact, we had seen no artificial light or sign of fire since we had entered Pellucidar. In a land of perpetual noon, there is no need of light above ground. Yet I marveled that they had no means of lighting their way through these dark subterranean passages. So we crept along at a snail's pace, with much stumbling and falling, the guards keeping up a sing-song chant ahead of us, interspersed with certain high notes which I found always indicated rough places and turns. Halts were now more frequent, but I did not wish to speak to Diane until I could see from the expression of her face how she was receiving my apologies. At last a faint glow ahead forewarned us at the end of the tunnel, for which I for one was devotedly thankful. Then at a sudden turn we emerged into the full light of the noonday sun, but with a sudden realization of what meant to me a real catastrophe. Diane was gone, and with her a half-dozen other prisoners. The guards saw it too, and the ferocity of their rage was terrible to behold. Their awesome bestial faces were contorted in the most diabolical expressions as they accused each other of responsibility for the loss. Finally they fell upon us, beating us with their spear shafts and hatchets. They had already killed 2 near the head of the line, and we were like to have finished the balance of us when their leader finally put a stop to the brutal slaughter. Never in all my life had I witnessed a more horrible exhibition of bestial rage. I thank God that Diane had not been one of those left to endure it. Of the 12 prisoners who had been chained ahead of me, each alternate one had been free, commencing with Diane. Hooja was gone. Gat remained. What could it mean? How had it been accomplished? The commander of the guards was investigating. Soon he discovered that the rude locks which had held the neckband in place had been definitely picked. Hooja the sly one, murmured Gat, who was now next to me in line. He has taken the girl that you would not have, he continued, glancing at me. That I would not have, I cried. What do you mean? He looked at me closely for a moment. I have doubted your story that you are from another world, he said at last, but yet upon so other grounds could your ignorance of the ways of Pellucidar be explained. Do you really mean that you do not know that you offended the beautiful one, and how? I do not know, Jack, I replied. Then shall I tell you? When a man of Pellucidar intervenes between another man and the woman, the other man would have the woman belongs to the victor. Diane the beautiful belongs to you. You should have claimed her or released her. Had you taken her hand, it would have indicated your desire to make her your mate. And had you raised her hand above her head and then dropped it, it would have meant that you did not wish her for a mate, and that you released her from all obligation to you. By doing neither, you have put upon her the greatest affront that a man may put upon a woman. Now she is your slave. No man will take her as a mate, or may take her honorably, until he shall overcome you in combat. And men do not choose slave women as their mates, at least not the men of Pellucidar. I did not know, Gak, I cried. I did not know. Not for all Pellucidar would have I harmed Diane the Beautiful by word or look or act of mine. I do not want her as my slave. I do not want her as my... But here I stopped. The vision of that sweet and innocent face floated before me amidst the soft mist of imagination, and where I had on the second believed that I clung only to the memory of a gentle friendship I had lost. Yet now it seemed that it would have been disloyalty to her to have said that I did not want Diane the Beautiful as my mate. I had not thought of her except as a welcome friend in a strange, cruel world. Even now I did not think that I loved her. I believe God must have read the truth more in my expression than in my words, for presently he laid his hand upon my shoulder. Man of another world, he said, I believe you. Lips may lie, but when the heart speaks through the eyes, it tells only the truth. Your heart has spoken to me. I know that you meant no affront to Diane the Beautiful. She is not of my tribe, but her mother is my sister. She does not know it. Her mother was stolen by Diane's father, who came with many others of the tribe of Amos to battle with us for our women, the most beautiful women of Pellucidar. Then was her father king of Amos, and her mother was daughter of the king of Sari, to whose power I, his son, have succeeded. Diane is the daughter of kings, though her father is no longer king, since the Satrap tossed him and Jubal the Ugly One wrested his kingship from him. Because of her lineage, the wrong you did her was greatly magnified in the eyes of all who saw it. She will never forgive you. I asked God if there was not some way in which I could release the girl from the bondage and ignominy I had unwittingly placed upon her. If you ever find her, yes, he answered. Merely to raise your hand above her head and drop it in the presence of others is sufficient to release her. But how may you ever find her? You who are doomed to the life of slavery yourself in the very city of the future. Is there no escape, I asked. Who the sly one escaped and took the others with him, replied God. But there are no more dark places on the way to the future. And once there it is not so easy. The Mahars are very wise. Even if one escaped from future, there are the Thipdars. They would find you, and then the hairy one shuddered. No, you will never escape the Mahars. It was a cheerful prospect. I asked Perry what he thought about it, but he only shrugged his shoulders and continued a long-winded prayer he had been at for some time. He was wont to say that the only redeeming feature of our captivity was the ample time it gave him for the improvisation of prayers. It was becoming an obsession with him. The Sagas had begun to take notice of his habit of declaiming throughout entire marches. One of them asked him what he was saying, to whom he was talking. The question gave me an idea, so I answered quickly, before Perry could say anything. Do not interrupt him, I said. He is a very holy man in the world from which we come. He is speaking to spirits which you cannot see. Do not interrupt him, or they will spring out of the air upon you and rend you limb from limb. Like that, and I jumped toward the great brute with a loud boom that sent him stumbling backward. I took a long chance, I realized, but if we could make any capital out of Perry's harmless mania, I wanted to make it while the making was prime. It worked splendidly. The Sagas treated us both with marked respect during the balance of the journey, and then passed the word along to their masters, the Mahars. 2 marches after this episode, we came to the City of Future. The entrance to it was marked by 2 lofty towers of granite, which guarded a flight of steps leading to the buried city. Sagas were on guard here as well as at 100 or more other towers scattered about over a large plain. Slaves. As we descended the broad staircase which led to the main avenue of the future, I caught my first sight of the dominant race of the inner world. Involuntarily, I shrank back as one of the creatures approached to inspect us. A more hideous thing it would be impossible to imagine. The all-powerful Mahars of Plustar are gray reptiles, some 6 or 8 feet in length, with long, narrow heads and great round eyes. Their beak-like mouths are lined with sharp white fangs, and the backs of their huge lizard bodies are serrated into bony ridges from their necks to the end of their long tails. Their feet are equipped with 3 webbed toes, while from the 4 feet membranous wings, which are attached to their bodies just in front of the hind legs, protrude at an angle of 45 degrees toward the rear, ending in sharp points several feet above their bodies. I glanced at Perry as the thing passed me to inspect him. The old man was gazing at the horrid creature with wide, astonished eyes. When it passed on, he turned to me. "For unfortunates of the Middle Oleotic, David," he said, "but gad, how enormous! The largest remains we ever have discovered have never indicated a size greater than that attained by an ordinary crow." As we continued on through the main avenue of the future, we saw many thousands of the creatures coming and going upon their daily duties. They paid but little attention to us. Future is laid out underground with a regularity that indicates remarkable engineering skill. It is hewn from solid limestone strata. The streets are broad and of a uniform height of 20 feet. At interval, tubes pierce the roof of this underground city, and by means of lenses and reflectors transmit the sunlight, softened and diffused to dispel what would otherwise be Sumerian darkness. In like manner, air is introduced. Perry and I were taken with Gak to a large public building, where one of the Sagas who had formed our guard explained to a Mahar and the official the circumstances surrounding our capture. The method of communication between these 2 was remarkable, in that unspoken words were exchanged. They employed a species of sign language, and as I was to learn later, the Mahars have no ears, nor any spoken language. Among themselves they communicate by means of what Perry says must be a 6th sense through his cognizance of a 4th dimension. I never did quite grasp him, though he endeavored to explain it to me upon numerous occasions. I suggested telepathy, but he said no, that it was not telepathy, since they could only communicate in each other's presence, nor could they talk with the Sagas or the other inhabitants of Plustar by the same method they used to converse with one another. What they do, said Perry, is to project their thoughts into the 4th dimension, when they become appreciable to the 6th sense of their listener. Do I make myself quite clear? You did not, Perry, I replied. He shook his head in despair and returned to his work. They had set us to carrying a great accumulation of Mahar literature from one apartment to another, and they are arranging it upon shelves. I suggested to Perry that we were in the public library of the future, but later, as he commenced to discover the key to their written language, he assured me that we were handling the ancient archives of the race. During this period, my thoughts were continually upon Diane the Beautiful. I was, of course, glad that she had escaped the Mahars, and the fate that she had been suggested by the Saga, who had threatened to purchase her upon our arrival at the future. I often wondered if the little party of fugitives had been overtaken by the guards who had returned to search for them. Sometimes I was not so sure but that I should have been more contented to know that Diane was here in future than to think of her at the mercy of Hooja the Sly One. Gak, Perry, and I often talked together of possible escape, but the Syrian was so steeped in his lifelong belief that no one could escape from the Mahars except by a miracle, that he was not much aid to us. His attitude was one who waits for the miracle to come to him. At my suggestion, Perry and I had fashioned some sort of scrap of iron which we discovered among some rubbish in the cells where we slept. We were permitted an almost unrestrained freedom of action within the limits of the building to which we had been assigned. So great were the number of slaves who waited upon the inhabitants of future that none of us were apt to be overburdened with work, nor were our masters unkind to us. We hid our new weapons beneath the skins which formed our beds, and then Perry conceived the idea of making bows and arrows, weapons apparently unknown within Pellucidar. Next came shields, but these I found it easier to steal from the walls of the outer garment of the building. We had completed this arrangements for our protection after leaving Future when the Sagas who had been sent to recapture the escaped prisoners returned with 4 of them, of whom Hooja was one. Diane and 2 others had eluded them. It so happened that Hooja was confined in the same building with us. He told Gat that he had not seen Diane or the others after releasing them within the dark grotto. What had become of them, he had not the faintest conception. They might be wandering yet, lost within the labyrinth tunnel, if not dead from starvation. I was still now further apprehensive as to the fate of Diane, and at this time I imagine came the first realization that my affection for the girl might be prompted by more than friendship. During my waking hours she was constantly the subject of my thoughts, and when I slept her dear face haunted my dreams. More than ever I was determined to escape from my heart. Perry, I confided to the old man, if I had to search every inch of this diminutive world, I am going to find Diane the beautiful and right the wrong I unintentionally did her. That was the excuse I made for Perry's benefit. Diminutive world, he scoffed. You don't know what you are talking about, my boy. And then he showed me a map of Pellucidar, which he had recently discovered among the manuscript he was arranging. Look, he cried, pointing to it, this is evidently water and all this land. Do you notice the general configuration of the 2 areas? Where the oceans are upon the outer crust is land here. These relatively small areas of ocean follow the general lines of the continents of the outer world. We know that the crust of the globe is 500 miles in thickness. Then the inside diameter of Pellucidar must be 7,000 miles, and the superficial area 165,480,000 square miles. 3/4 of this is land. Think of it, a land area of 124,110,000 square miles. Our own world contains but 53 million square miles of land, the balance of its surface being covered by water. Just as we often compare nations by their relative land areas. So if we compare these 2 worlds in the same way, we have the strange anomaly of a larger world within a smaller one. Where within vast Pellucidar would you search for Diane? Without stars and moon or changing sun, how could you find her even though you knew where she might be found? The proposition was a corker. It quite took my breath away, but I found that it left me all the more determined to attempt it. If Gat will accompany us, we may be able to do it, I suggested. Perry and I sought him out and put the question straight to him. Gat, I said, we are determined to escape from this bondage. Will you accompany us? They will set the thick darts upon us, he said. Then we shall be killed. But he hesitated. I would take the chance if I thought that I might possibly escape and return to my own people. Did you find your way back to your own land? I asked Perry. And could you aid David in his search for Diane? Yes. But how, persisted Perry, could you travel to a strange country without heavenly bodies or a compass to guide you? Jack didn't know what Perry meant by heavenly bodies or a compass, but he assured us that you might blindfold any man of Plutar and carry him to the farthermost corner of the world, yet he would be able to come directly to his own home again by the shortest route. He seemed surprised to think that we found anything wonderful in it. Perry said it must be some sort of homing instinct such as is possessed by certain breeds of earthly pigeons. I didn't know, of course, but it gave me an idea. Then Diane could have found her way directly to her own people, I asked. Surely, replied Jack, unless some mighty beast of prey killed her. I was for making the attempted escape at once, but both Perry and Jack counseled waiting for some propitious accident which would ensure some small degree of success. I didn't see what accident could befall a whole community in a land of perpetual daylight where the inhabitants had no fixed habits of sleep. Why, I'm sure that some of the Mahars never sleep, while others may, at long intervals, crawl into the dark recesses beneath their dwellings and curl up in protracted slumber. Perry says that if a Mahar stays awake for 3 years, he will make up all his lost sleep in a long year's snooze. That may be all true, but I never saw but 3 of them asleep, and it was the sight of these 3 that gave me a suggestion for our means of escape. I have been searching about far below the levels that we slaves were supposed to frequent, possibly 50 feet beneath the main floor of the building, among a network of corridors and apartments, when I came suddenly upon 3 Mahars curled upon a bed of skins. At first I thought they were dead, but later their regular breathing convinced me of my error. Like a flash, the thought came to me of the marvelous opportunity these sleeping reptiles offered as a means of eluding the watchfulness of our captors and the Saga guards. Hastening back to Perry, where he pored over a musty pile of, to me, meaningless hieroglyphics, I explained my plan to him. To my surprise, he was horrified. It would be murder, David, he cried. Murder to kill a reptilian monster, I asked in astonishment. Here they are not monsters, David, he replied. Here they are the dominant race. We are the monsters, the lower orders. In Pellucidar, evolution has progressed along different lines than upon the outer earth. These terrible convulsions of nature time and time again wiped out the existing species. But for this fact, some monster of the Cenozoic epoch might rule today upon our own world. We see here what might have well occurred in our own history had conditions been what they have been here. Life within Pellucidar is far younger than upon the outer crust. Here man has but reached a strain analogous to the Stone Age of our own world's history. But for countless millions of years, these reptiles have been progressing. Possibly it is the sixth sense which I am sure they possess that has given them an advantage over the other and frightfully armed of their fellows. But this we may never know. They look upon us as we look upon the beasts of our fields. And I learn from their written records that other races of Mahars feed upon men. They keep them in great droves as we keep cattle. They breed them most carefully, and when they are quite fat, they kill and eat them. I shuddered. What is there horrible about it, David? The old man asked. They understand us no better than we understand the lower animals of our own world. Why, I have come across here very learned discussions of the question as to whether Galax, status men, have any means of communication. One writer claims that we do not even reason, that our every act is mechanical or instinctive. The dominant race of Pellucidar, David, have not yet learned that men converse among themselves to reason. Because we do not converse as they do, it is beyond them to imagine that we converse at all. It is thus that we reason in relation to the brutes of our own world. They know that the Sagas have a spoken language, but they cannot comprehend it, or how it manifests itself, since they have no auditory apparatus. They believe that the motions of the lips alone convey the meaning. That the Sagas can communicate with us is incomprehensible to them. Yes, David, he concluded, it would entail murder to carry out your plan. Very well then, Perry, I replied. I shall become a murderer. He got me to go over the plan again most carefully, and for some reason which was not at the time clear to me, insisted upon a very careful description of the apartments and corridors I had just explored. I wonder, David, he said at length, as you are determined to carry out your wild scheme, if we cannot accomplish something of very real and lasting benefit for the human race of Blue Star at the same time. Listen, I have learned much of the most surprising nature from these archives of the Mahars. That you may appreciate my plan, I shall briefly outline the history of the race. Once the males were all powerful, but ages ago the females, little by little, assumed the mastery. For other ages, no noticeable change took place in the race of Mahars. It continued to progress under the intelligent and benefit rule of the ladies. Science took vast strides. This was especially true of the sciences which we know as biology and eugenics. Finally, a certain female scientist announced that the fact that she had discovered a method whereby eggs might be fertilized by chemical means after they were laid. All true reptiles, are hatched from eggs. What happened? Immediately the necessity for males ceased to exist. The race was no longer dependent upon them. More ages elapsed until at the present time we find a race consisting exclusively of females. But here is the point. The secret of the chemical formula is kept by a single race of Mahars. It is in the city of the future. Unless I am greatly in error, I judge from your description of the vaults through which you passed today that it lies hidden in the cellar of this building. For two reasons they hide it away and guard it jealously. First, because upon it depends the very life of the race of Mahars, and second, owing to the fact that when it was public property, as at the first, so many were experimenting with it that the danger of overpopulation became very grave. David, if we can escape and at the same time take with us the great secret, what will we not have accomplished for the human race within Pellucidar? The very thought of it fairly overpowered me. While we too would be the means of placing the men of the inner world in their rightful place among created things, only the Sagas would then stand between them and absolute supremacy. And I was not quite sure but that the Sagas owed all their power to the greater intelligence of the Mahars. I could not believe that these gorilla-like beasts were the mental superiors of the human race of Pellucidar. Why, Perry, I explained, you and I may reclaim a whole world. Together we can lead the races of men out of the darkness of ignorance into the light of advancement and civilization. At one step we may carry them from the age of stone to the 20th century. It is marvelous, absolutely marvelous, just to think about it. David, said the old man, I believe that God sent us here for just that purpose. It shall be my life work to teach them His word, to lead them into the light of His mercy, while we are training their hearts and hands in the ways of culture and civilization. You are right, Perry, I said, and while you are teaching them to pray, I will be teaching them to fight. And between us we'll make a race of men that will be an honor to us both. Gag had entered the apartment some time before we concluded our conversation, and now he wanted to know what we were so excited about. Perry thought we had best not tell him too much, so I only explained that I had a plan for escape. When I had outlined it to him, he seemed about as horror-struck as Perry had been, but for a different reason. The hairy one only considered the horrible fate that would be ours were we discovered. But at last I prevailed upon him to accept my plan as the only feasible one, and when I had assured him that I would take all the responsibility for it were we captured, he accorded a reluctant assent. The beginning of horror. Within Pellucidar, one time is as good as another. There were no nights to mask our attempt to escape. All must be done in broad daylight. All but the work I had to do in the apartment beneath the building. So we determined to put our plan to an immediate test, lest the Mahars, who made it possible, should await before I reached them. But we were doomed to disappointment, for no sooner had we reached the main floor of the building on our way to the pits beneath than we encountered hurrying bands of slaves being hastened under strong Sagas guard out of the edifice to the avenue beyond. Other Sagas were darting hither and thither in search of other slaves, and the moment that we appeared, we were pounced upon and hustled into the line of marching humans. What the purpose of or nature of the general exodus we did not know, but presently, though the line of captives ran the rumor that 2 escaped slaves had been recaptured, a man and a woman, that we were marching to witness their punishment. For the man who killed a Sagas of the detachment that had pursued and overtaken him. At the intelligence, my heart sprang to my throat, for I was sure that 2 were of those who escaped in the dark grotto with Hooja Slawan, that Diane must be the woman. God thought so too, as did Perry. Is there naught that we may do to save her? I asked Scott. Naught, he replied. Along the crowded avenue we marched, the guards showing unusual cruelty toward us, as though we too had been implicated in the murder of their fellow. The occasion was to serve as object lesson to all the other slaves of the danger and futility of attempted escape and the fatal consequences of taking the life of a superior being. And so I imagine that Sagas felt justified in making the entire proceeding as uncomfortable and painful to us as possible. They jabbed us with their spears and struck at us with their hatchets at the least provocation and no provocation at all. It was a most uncomfortable half hour that we spent before we were finally herded through a low entrance into a huge building, the center of which was given up to a good-sized arena. Benches surrounded this open space upon 3 sides, and along the 4th were heaped huge boulders which rose in receding tiers toward the roof. At first I couldn't make out the purpose of this mighty pile of rock, unless it were intended as a rough and picturesque background for the scenes which were enacted in the arena before it. But presently, after the wooden benches had been pretty well filled by slaves and Sagas, I discovered the purpose of the boulders, for then the Mahars began to file into the enclosure. They marched directly across the arena toward the rocks upon the opposite side, where spreading their bat-like wings they rose above the high wall of the pit, settling down upon the boulders above. These were the reserved seats, the boxes of the elect. Reptiles that they are, the rough surface of a great stone is to them as plush as upholstery to us. Here they loll, blinking their hideous eyes and doubtless conversing with one another in their sixth sense, 4th dimension language. For the first time I beheld their queen. She differed from the others in no feature that was all appreciable to my earthly eyes. In fact, all the Mahars looked alike to me, but when she crossed the arena after the balance of her female subjects had found their boulders, she was preceded by a score of huge Sagas, the largest I had ever seen, and on either side of her waddled a huge Thitdar, while behind came another score of Sagas guardsmen. At the barrier, the Sagas clambered up the steep side with truly ape-like agility, while behind them the haughty queen rose upon her wings with her 2 frightful dragons close beside her, and settled down upon the largest boulder of them all in the exact center of that side of the amphitheater which is reserved for the dominant race. Here she squatted, a most repulsive, uninteresting queen. They are doubtless quite as well assured of her beauty and divine right to rule as the proudest monarchs of the outer world. And then the music started. Music without sound. The Mahars cannot hear, so the drums and fifes and horns of earthly bands are unknown among them. The band consists of a score or more Mahars. It filed out into the center of the arena where the creatures upon the rocks might see it, and there it performed 15 or 20 minutes. Their technique consisted in waving their tails and moving their heads in a regular succession of measured movements, resulting in a cadence which evidently pleased the eye of the Mahar, as the cadence of our own instrumental music pleases our ears. Sometimes the man took measured steps and unsung to one side or the other, or backward and again forward. It all seemed very silly and meaningless to me, but at the end of the first piece the Mahars upon the rock showed the first indications of enthusiasm that I had seen displayed by the dominant race of Pellucidar. They beat their great wings up and down and smote the rocky perches with their mighty tails until the ground shook. Then their band started another piece, and all was again as silent as the grave. That was one great beauty about Mahar music. If you didn't happen to like a piece that was being played, all you had to do was shut your eyes. When the band had exhausted its repertory, it took wing and settled upon the rocks above and behind the queen. Then the business of the day was on. A man and a woman were pushed into the arena by a couple of Sagoth guardsmen. I leaned far forward in my seat to scrutinize the female, hoping against hope that she might prove to be another than Diane the Beautiful. Her back was toward me for a while, and the sight of the great mass of raven hair piled high upon her head filled me with alarm. Presently a door on one side of the arena wall was opened to admit a huge, shaggy, bull-like creature. "A boss," whispered Perry excitedly. "His kind roamed the outer crust with the cave bear and the mammoths ages and ages ago. We have been carried back 1,000,000 years, David, to the childhood of a planet. Is it not wondrous?" But I saw only the raven hair of a half-naked girl, and my heart stood still in dumb misery at the sight of her. Nor had I any eyes for the wonders of natural history. But for Perry and Gak, I should have leaped to the floor of the arena and shared whatever fate lay in store for this priceless treasure of the Stone Age. With the advent of the boss, they called the thing a thag within Pellucidar, 2 spears were tossed into the arena at the feet of the prisoners. It seemed to me that a bean shooter would have been as effective against the mighty monster as these pitiful weapons. As the animal approached the two, bellowing and pawing the ground with the strength of many earthly bulls, another door directly beneath us was opened, and from it issued the most terrific roar that I ever had fallen upon my outraged ears. I could not at first see the beast from which emanated this fearsome challenge, but the sound had the effect of bringing the 2 victims around with a sudden start, and then I saw the girl's face. She was not Diane. I could have wept for relief. And now, as the 2 stood frozen in terror, I saw the author of that fearsome sound creeping stealthily into view. It was a huge tiger, such as hunted the great boss through the jungles primeval when the world was young. In contour and markings, it was not unlike the noblest of the Mengals of our own world, but at its dimensions were exaggerated to colossal proportions, so to where its coloring is exaggerated. Its vivid yellows fairly screamed aloud. Its whites were as eider down. Its blacks glossy as the finest anthracite coal, and its coat long and shaggy as mountain goat. That is a beautiful animal. There is no gainsaying. But if its size and colors are magnified here within Pellucidar, so is the ferocity of it.